Okay, we're all set.
All right, Nancy, you have our attendance.
I do.
Thank you. All right, so we have under old business minutes from December 15th. Does anyone have any corrections to be made to them?
I'll move approval with the minutes, so we have it, it's on the agenda.
All right, moved by Bob, seconded by Bob. Bob Ike is, you're muted.
Second, I second it. I'm
You
seconding
second
it.
it. Okay, thank you. All right, anybody have corrections to the minutes? Don't see any hands up. All right, so all in favor of Bob's motion to approve the minutes, please say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any nays?
I abstain because I didn't see them, sorry.
Okay. All right, so we have the motion passes. Thank you. New business, committee updates. Maxine, anything on survey and outreach?
No report at this time, thanks.
All right, thank you, Maxine. Leah, programming and space planning. Did we lose Leah? No, there you are. You're muted. And you have a mask.
She's at work.
Yeah.
Sorry, what?
You have a report.
You have a report from on your subcommittee.
The only thing is I'll be sending out a doodle poll shortly to the subcommittee members about our next meeting. So, sorry.
Okay. I did ask Leah to make sure included within the scope of that committee to include technology. It's very early, and I think it's appropriate now to get going on technology. It's going to be very complicated and you know, a lot of pieces to it. So
Yeah, agreed.
thank you for taking that on. Any questions for Leah? Okay. Bob Berman, owner rep subcommittee.
Yeah, we got this draft RFPs from Nancy and Chris. Kendra and I are reviewing them, and then we'll send Nancy our thoughts on it in the near future, so we can get the RFP out hopefully early, sometime early January. That's it.
Questions for Bob? All right, thanks, Bob. And this brings us to director's report. Elizabeth?
Yes, we continue to work with TSKP about programming space and on staff working to make sure that we have what is needed documented accordingly. And at the moment, we're dealing with reacting to COVID-19, the upsurge as well.
All right, questions for Elizabeth? All right, we are moving right along. Richard, I know you don't have a formal report tonight. Anything you do want to share with us?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I've had good conversations with Jonathan Tarbox. He's the surveyor that was selected by the committee. He has started work. Unfortunately, however, he is going to take 45 days to do the survey work for the Prosser site, which includes the former Riley lumber parcel. And I told him that that was more urgent than the McMahon library site because it's going to take another 30 days when he finishes the first survey to continue with the second survey. So from my perspective, the priority is Prosser, including the Riley lumber site, and second, the McMahon site. And the reason is because McMahon is relatively flat. It doesn't have the flooding issue or the washbrook issue. And I told him that it's critical that he confirm the height of the ground floor, the lowest floor, as well as confirm the floodplain on that site, because we're going to set the elevations of the building based upon the actual topographic maps that he provides. So he is proceeding. The geotechnical consultant you selected, Welty Associates, he is starting at the beginning of January. He said he'll be finished by the 3rd week of January, so I expect to get a report from him. I don't see any complications there. But the impact that the survey has on us will change the delivery date for the design of the schematic portion of our project. What we would like to do is, but we'll make up for that time in the subsequent phases of design development and construction documents. So the construction documents deadline remains the same. It doesn't have an impact on Downs's bidding schedule, but we would like to complete the schematic design portion of the project by the end of March. We do owe you some design input, some design presentation, which we would like to target for your regularly scheduled meeting on February 23rd. And at that meeting, we'll deliver all of the plans for both buildings, as well as a model for both buildings, exterior renderings, interior renderings, all the elevations, so that you have a complete picture all the way around the building. We'll also talk about the materials. And then we'll ask for the committee's input on that after that presentation is made, so that we can continue and wrap up the schematic design by the end of March, as I said. We did talk about that schedule with Downs's meeting. We had a working session with them a week ago, I believe, and I think they will probably report on their schedule maybe a little bit later this evening. Another person that's been added to the team is Jeanette O'Connell. She's one of the interiors people here in the office. They, and along with others, are responsible for the furniture and equipment specifications. And I asked her to reach out to Elizabeth and her team, because I think we need to confirm the furniture budget earlier rather than later. As a reminder, the Downs's budget, overall project budget, includes a total of $850,000 for furniture. That includes library shelving for both buildings. And right now, it's allocated $750,000 for the Prosser Library and $100,000 for the McMahon Library. But you remember that your commitment to the town is the total dollar amount of both projects combined. And if there's a need to reallocate funds from one building to the other building, I think you can do that without any difficulty. So I told Jeanette that she must confirm this budget for furniture sooner rather than later. So Jeanette will be reaching out to you, Elizabeth, and confirming things like numbers of seats, numbers of volumes in your collection for both buildings, which will dictate the shelving required. I think that's it from my end.
All right, questions for Richard? See any hands? All right, Richard, thank you. We had talked, as you mentioned, at our owner architect CM meeting during the week about extending the schematic phase to the end of March. And given the importance of the design, I think it's going to be a positive for the project, seeing as we're not going to lose any overall time. So that's my take on that. Let's go to Tom at Downs.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I gave Scott the night off tonight. So our update is quick and brief. We're continuing to support TSKP. We're supporting the town as it relates to onboarding of consultants. We've updated the schedule based on our discussions of extending the schematic design. So we're continuing to monitor the schedule. We're also adding activities as we meet in our owner architect meetings so that we can maintain the overall delivery date of the construction documents. We're kind of standing at the ready to do some investigative work over at McMahon to help Richard and his team with the design. So we did discuss that. We're also prepared and ready to attend subcommittee meetings, as Mark mentioned, with IT to lend support, review the budgets and anything that comes up.
Questions for Tom? I did mention to Scott that that hopefully I'd like to see at our next regular building committee meeting in January the full schedule that you have for the whole building committee. Sure,
Okay.
and a budget. You know where we sit with the budget. By that point, we'll have let's see. We'll have committed to CM fees. We will hopefully be committed to architectural fees, and we will also have our miscellaneous consultants such as soil testing and survey, a few more of those on board. So we'll
Right.
have something to look at budget wise where we're at our next meeting. And
Okay.
Indications are that we're doing very well actually. So. All right, thank you, Tom. Let's see, Nancy, you have approval of contract here.
That's for after the executive session.
Okay, so we will return to that. All right, so that's all of our new business. Next meeting's coming up January 12th and January 26th. Anybody know of any issues in attending? Just let me know if they do come up. Comments from the committee? Looking for hands. Lois.
Mark, I wonder whether others on the committee have had a chance to go over and walk from Riley Lumber to the library. It's something that I did recently, and I thought it was really quite helpful in terms of imagining how long the walk would be.
Just to add to that conversation, I have not done it, but I've certainly been on both sites. I haven't, specifically walked it, but right now we don't know exactly where the back, and I'm saying back of the building, the west side of the building falls. It's certainly closer to the brook than the west side of the building is now. So, if you do take that walk, you got to realize that the building's closer to the brook than it is now. So, don't go by where the building, sits presently. So it's, I think at some point, Richard, if you could just at the appropriate time when where the west side of the new building will be, where it falls in relation to the existing west side. Just let us
I
know.
really would encourage everyone to do it even now, because I was impressed that it is not a very great distance, even when you have to walk out and walk along Mountain Avenue. The thing that I was more concerned about was the grade. So I'm going to be very interested in knowing what the grade situation will be, but it was Christmas time, so I was thinking about trying to get into West Farms Mall. And I think most times on a busy day, people walk much further to get into West Farms Mall than they would walking from Riley to get into the library. I just think it's helpful if people would actually go over and have a sense for it, because what you do now will be longer than what the final would be. I just hope everybody will do that. If we can't do it together, okay, but at least do it separately. Thank you.
Thanks, Lois. More comments from the committee? Okay, can move on to public comments. Nancy, do we have hands raised from the public?
Let's see. Yes, we do. We have Sten Casperson. Go ahead, Sten.
Muted, Stan.
He's
Good
okay
evening,
now.
everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A very brief comment, just hearing about the schedule, et cetera. The committee should keep in mind and ask about long lead materials. What are they and what are the risks in some of these things? And I suspect that windows are probably a major item at the top of the pile, but put that in the hands of your people who are doing their procuring. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the public like to speak? I see no other hands raised.
All right. Thank you, Stan. Let's go to, we need a motion to go into executive session so we can discuss contract.
So moved.
Moved by Bob
Second.
Wright, seconded by, I missed the second, by Lois. Thank you.
Okay, and at this point, I'm going to ask the people in the audience if they would log out so we can continue. You're not
Just
going to
take a vote. I
pause.
need to take a vote on that, Nancy. Just
Oh, I'm
all in
sorry.
favor of going into executive session. Please say,
I think,
yay, raise your hand.
Mark, I think part of the motion needs to be with the committee, the ad hoc members, town manager, and I think we want the liaison and the mayor involved.
Agreed.
Correct. I accept that. New motion, yes. I meant with amended corrections.
All right, thank you. All right, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any nays on that? Okay, so we are out of executive session. And do I hear a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept TSKP's proposal for architectural fees, the amount of $1,790,000.
Second,
Yeah, I think we want to make sure that Bob, that's for,
With the three-step, with one round of bidding, one round of addenda, common date for construction meetings.
no, more about that we're recommending this to the
Oh,
town
sorry.
manager.
I move that we recommend the town manager that he sign a contract with TSKP in the amount of $1,790,000.
second,
All right.
Do we need to stipulate how much per project?
No, because money can move from one to the other. We're not stuck there. That's just basically how they formulated the total.
I'll second.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion? All right, all in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye. Or raise your
Aye.
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 nays. All right, motion has passed. I thank everybody for that. And we have no other business before us, so I will take a motion to adjourn.
I move we
So
adjourn.
moved.
Second.
Bob and Bob, thank
All right.
you. All right, all in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
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 Nays. All right, I thank everybody and Happy New Year, happy, healthy New Year to everybody.
Yeah,
Happy New Year.
to
And
everybody.
we will see you on the other side.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.